we have, hello, Mark.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
Just to let my audience know, this is Mark Harrington calling from Newsday, and we're going to talk about a story. Actually, why don't you tell us about the story? The headline: "The rising costs make Long Island vineyards a challenging passion." What's going on there?
Well, it's always been somewhat of a challenging passion. It's opening a vineyard is never something that people have done purely for the profit, but some late trends have made it even more challenging for folks. And so you see, I think that there are some well-heeled people who get into this and don't really expect to make a lot of money, but the grim reality is that it's not always easy to turn a profit, selling wine, especially on Long Island where costs are pretty high.
Right. It's funny, when I read the article, and in the back of my head I'm thinking about horse racing. And how they're,
right.
It's kind of the same thing, that you get into it. I guess you could make a killing.
Very much like that, yeah. Even some of the biggest ones. I think Pindar is probably the most publicly known, most highly distributed. They don't release their profit figures, but it's just very difficult to build a market here. And again, land costs are high. Labor costs specifically have been going up pretty dramatically for folks in the last few years, as that there have been crackdowns on immigration, and so people have. Finding people is tougher, and so you wind up having to pay people more to get the fewer people who are available for labor.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You think that? I think that's kind of going to be a national trend. Cheap labor ain't what it used to be.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Especially here on Long Island, it's because even labor here has high costs. It's not like you can always find a cheap place to live. There's a lot in transportation costs, getting to the vineyard to work. It's not easy, and there's not a lot of college kids who are willing to pick grapes, especially in October, November when they're doing a lot of the harvesting in September.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult proposition, but. There are people who just love it and are going to stick it out, and it purely is a passion.
Right.
Maybe it's a break-even proposition. Maybe there's some losses, but there are a few who have done very well. Palmanock Vineyard is mentioned in the story in Aquabog, and they're one of the few that has really sort of hit their stride. They employ mostly family members in the main operations, and so they're doing pretty well.
Right.
There are maybe about a dozen or so that I think are really excelling. Some of them are new startups or new recent owners who are sort of learning the ropes, and that's always expensive and costly.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, really? Especially in something like that. You can't take too many or make too many mistakes and stay alive.
Right, and it's an investment. Every year you say, okay, we're gonna spend this amount, and this is what we expect to get back. And as one of the vineyard owners say in the story, it's like you make the investment, and you could potentially lose everything if there's a really, really bad weather at the end of the season. You spend the whole year spraying and picking leaves and everything else to get the peak of flavor, and then if you have a really bad rainstorm or a hailstorm at the very end of the season, say in September, everything can get destroyed. And that did happen one year.
Right.
There were sort of biblical rains on Long Island, and it just washed out a lot of people. The rains, just 7 days of rain, just devastated the crop, and people have it's remembered as one of those years where you just lost everything, or most people lost a great deal.
Yeah, right. Well, I see in part of your one of the things you mentioned in the story was how the land is assessed, and how much or did you perceive, or do you feel that the government is involved in a kind of, I don't know, on the negative side of this? Are they?
Well, I think in general there's a feeling that from folks that you talk to out there that government, in terms of regulating, at least local governments, they feel regulation has really kind of stymied the business. There was one a vineyard owner, brand new owner, just a few years in Southold, who tried to open a tasting barn on his property. Ultimately was rejected, and he just ultimately sold out and left. Moved his family back to Texas. He said it was just too difficult. So local regulations can be prohibitive. I think in the case of Palmer Vineyards, which we talk about there, about the property tax assessment, they've been complaining about that property tax assessment for some years. We have gotten a call back from the Riverhead towns since then saying that there are particulars with that case, but Long Island generally school costs very high, so you're going to be paying higher taxes, and that for a business that is razor thin runs on those razor thin margins. It's very difficult to make money when you're paying high property taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to keep an enterprise like this alive, you really have to be creative.
True, and you have to know marketing, which is mentioned in there. Giovanni Borghese, his mom was a brilliant marketer, passed away unfortunately, and he's taken up the lead of his parents and taken over the vineyard, and spending a lot of his time, very creatively marketing the place and looking at new ways to get people to come in the winter when there's very low traffic on the east end. So marketing is creativity and marketing are two of the real things that can drive your business and turn around some of those problems.
But it seems like it's a shame that people attempt to be creative and get these things going, and then a regulation says they can't do that or they can't do this.
Right. Well, I will say that some people, specifically Pominock and Charles Massoud at Pominock, have said that Governor Cuomo has been actually pretty helpful to them in turning around some of these draconian regulations that made doing business from a state perspective very difficult. So he's eliminated some taxes, and he has made things, surprisingly, really made it pro winery and pro business for a lot of the North Fork and the upstate vineyards, the Finger Lakes region. So I've all really appreciated some of the things he's done. So that has changed things from a state perspective, but locally and federally, not so much.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that so many of these pieces of property are like prime real estate. Is there any pressure from the developers to kind of maybe want some of them to go down?
Oh, it's happened, and some of them, there's a process where you can sell your development rights, and many of those properties have sold their development rights, which means that say Suffolk County would have paid them money so that they do not develop this land. It's a way of preserving the land. So a lot of them have sold the development rights, meaning that a new owner could not put apartments or houses on them. So they may be constrained in that way, but there are some that still have not sold the rights, and I think there is pressure by developers to try and get some of that acreage out there. It's just a very beautiful area, and there's a lot of resistance to something like a condo complex or a new housing complex on a vineyard.
We have so many of those. It just seems, I don't know, and it's anecdotal, I'm sure, but it just seems that everywhere you look, there's another condo complex, and to see this pristine land. I remember the last time I saw a big chunk of Suffolk County, I was coming into MacArthur Airport. Mm-hmm. And it just made me feel so good to see all that green, because because the perception is when you drive on 347 or you're out on Northern State, it's all built up.
Exactly. So going on the North Fork, especially, there's two main roads, and you can travel for miles and miles, and you'll see primarily vineyard, in addition to wooded areas, and it takes you to a different place. It's almost unlong. It's very characteristic now of the North Fork, especially, but it's not like any other place on Long Island. So I think that there is a real reluctance to see any of that land sold and developed any other way.
Oh, I hope that continues. I hope that because I know what you're saying. You drive in go up there sometime and just drive in the back roads and get lost.
Right,
and you feel like you could be in Vermont, you could be in New Hampshire, depending on when you go. And to me, it's I grew up on Long Island. I've been here 60 plus years, so I can remember standing on Route 110 in Farmingdale and looking east, and the land was it's just flat as far as the eye could see.
It's amazing.
And that's when it was potato farms.
Yeah, well, that's what many of these vineyards were as well. And so they've, those people, the early pioneers from the 70s, turned that land around and turned it into vineyards, and now a lot of their children are running those same properties. And the good news is that the wines, the reputation of the wines on Long Island are getting much better than they have at any other period. So you're actually getting great reviews from some national publications, and it's turning into a real a recognized wine region, just like those on the West Coast and other parts of the world.
I was thinking of that, Napa Valley, because growing up, we never heard about that. we never heard about Napa. And then and they could have been going for 100 years before we were ever, aware. And all of a sudden it's this new thing. And oh my God, they're making wine in America. Like it was new to us, I guess. But maybe they didn't have they could make a certain amount of product and they didn't really need us.
Exactly. But here it's, things are changing, and it's been a long, slow evolution for specifically for Long Island wines. But I think people are really getting the act together out there, and it takes a while. But I think that you'll see some notable Long Island wines are making some pretty high profile placings on lists and things.
Well,
so really well.
Yeah, that thing is cool because it's funny because my perception is that if you want to get wines from one of the wineries out there, you go out and buy it.
Right.
You go there and buy it.
The experience of driving there and spending time and tasting is that's how most of them make their money.
Right. So that's one. But to be able to go to a restaurant in New York City and ask for a specific Long Island wine and get it. What's that possibility? Is that are they really a connected thing there, or
it's happening? Some of the better ones, as I mentioned, like Pominock and Bedell. This Wolfer Estate. There's probably about a dozen that have really made major inroads into high-profile markets like New York City. Right. They all haven't done it, but the ones that really have attention to detail and quality and taste have really managed to break in. As I think that they say there. Pominock they used to complain about not being able to get into New York, and now they're highly rated and they're there. So it is starting to happen. It's been a slow slog,
yeah.
But I think by the end of this decade, you probably see a lot more New York City and a lot more success on Long Island.
Yeah. So. I would love, I'd love to see them survive just for the fact that they keep that land fairly pristine.
Right. Exactly.
That alone. That's.
Yeah, and there's a lot of investment as well. There's always the desire to sort of build up tasting rooms and to develop more of the land as vineyards. So I think you'll continue to see that. Surrey Lane is a really interesting case because he was a fellow who was a CEO of Penguin Group, the publishing house.
Yes,
and he moved out there in 2014, and it's been some hard realities about what it's like to farm and everything else. But he is committed, and has some investment dollars. And now he wants to build a tasting room out there, which is it's always a challenge locally to get those approved, but it's that kind of investment. There's 3 or 4 big vineyard owners that are looking to do that as well. So I think you'll continue to see that investment, and as that happens, the whole area, the region continues to build up and be more recognized.
Yeah. Well, other than the single lane roads that go out there,
right? Especially during the pumpkin season,
yes.
It's not easy to get in and out. I'll tell you.
Even if you're not going to the winery, it's tough to just get a pie from one of those.
Right. It is really difficult. It's one of the challenges that you have to face. But I think that for most people, it's if you're a customer, it's worth it, and you do it, and it becomes part of the tradition of going out there.
Oh yeah.
Pick a pumpkin, get a bottle of wine, buy a pie on the way home.
Right. Well, it's funny. I've played with some bands that have played at the wineries.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I thought, this is a great thing. They would have a great room and maybe a bunch of picnic tables around, and people would go in and buy 2 bottles of wine and bring their picnic basket.
Wow.
And they would sit down and have a lunch for the cost of 2 bottles of wine.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is great. But basically, the wineries, in my mind, have the same issues that bars have, trying to get people to come in.
Music, getting designated drivers. And
all of that, yeah. Well, that too. That's going to start to become an issue. They're not just going to the vineyards, buying the wine and bringing it home. And I can see the problem with the tasting rooms, that kind of stuff. Because you don't want to turn that atmosphere into a bar atmosphere either.
Exactly, and I do hear complaints about that still. People have, every winery owner, especially those that encourage buses, has stories to tell about crazy things that have happened in the vineyards during their reign. But it's really nice. It's interesting to hear that you played music out there, because I think that in a way was a real turning point for a lot of the vineyards to do more than just offer people tasting, but to have to make it a full day.
And that's partially what got me, because I thought, looking at, they have hay rides and they have all of the games. Some of them have petting zoos, and I think I'm standing there looking at this saying, wow, they really have to I mean, they're obviously adding things other than it's not just the wine. Apparently, that's not going to do it.
Exactly.
So I'm curious to see what